Well, what is going on, YouTube? Welcome back to A Therapeutic Edge. Now, today on the table in front of us, we have something kind of special. This is a Strider, and well, this is my second Strider. You see, I had the SNG, and I didn't like it very much. It was too small for me in the end. For the amount of money that it cost, for the kind of knife it's supposed to be, the SNG was just not enough to fill my hand comfortably. But because of my interaction with the local Bay knife collectors group called BACA, Bay Area Knife Collectors Association, I've had my opportunity to get my hands on a bunch of what this is. Now, this is the SMF. This is the big boy version of Strider knives. And I came to realize that a big part of my problem with that SNG was the size. Getting an opportunity to get my hands on a larger version has made all the difference in the world. Now, I still think these things are absurdly expensive. They're about $500 if you can find one when they're released. And that is an exorbitant amount of money. It just is. But it's also a really interesting knife. So let's take a look at what you get. As with all Striders, it has the incredibly specific Strider design to it, and I really do enjoy that part. It is very comfortable, particularly the SMF model, the larger one. Now, this one is all aluminum with a titanium lock-side scale. It is CPM 20 CV. It is running on bronze washers. And so in many ways, it is a very straightforward, hard-use knife. The aluminum scale on this one has the Strider logo on it, which I think is very cool. It is all gray. On this side, it is the traditional Strider Flame Anno, which I really enjoy. The blade is DLC or some form of DLC coated, and again, it is CPM 20 CV. Now, I would have preferred a plain blade, particularly in CPM 20 CV, because that's a very rust-resistant steel. This is sort of an unnecessary step, but this is the way it came, and this is the way I got it. I've mentioned again how comfortable it is. Now, for my hands, as you can see, if I hold it on the handle itself, I have just a little bit of knife sticking out the back. And because of how thick this is, it is very palm-filling, which means this thing does not go anywhere. But of course, the Strider design has this marvelous forward choil. And so when I lock into this knife, particularly for push cuts along this line, man, this thing is not going anywhere, which is something it does not share. The smaller one, the SNG, moved around in my hand because of how narrow it was and how short. Anyway, that was not the knife for me. This is much more in line with my own personal aesthetic and particularly comfort. I am very into this thing. Now, I can't recommend that you go buy a Strider because I'm not going to suggest anybody spend that kind of money. But if you're already interested or if you're on the verge and you have bigger hands, if you can find yourself an SMF, I will say go for it. If you're on the fence, at least. I'm very glad that I got an opportunity to check one of these out. This one is going to stay in the collection, whereas the SNG moved right along. Because it is on washers, it does Spidey flick, but you can also sort of really naturally thumb roll it. It doesn't drop shut, but it does with a wiggle, and I love the sound of that when it closes. It's really very nice. Let's go ahead and get some measurements out of the way while we are talking about it. Now, one of the things that Strider knives have in common across the entire brand, or at least for the most part, is that he has a very specific amount of cutting surface versus handle, and for a lot of people, it's not a very good balance. And you can sort of understand why. If you take the whole blade into account, it is a very balanced knife, but it does have a relatively short cutting area for the amount of knife that you get. And what do you get? Well, you get 1, 2, 3 1/8 of cutting surface on 1, 2, 3, 4 inches of CPM 20 CV. So you've given up a lot of cutting surface through here for this choil and for the sharpening choil at this end. Not everyone is going to love that. I understand. I've come to appreciate it. Now, this particular one has a very thick piece of CPM 20 CV. And one of the complaints that I've read about these knives, at least the older ones, is that they didn't come to a very fine edge. But I got to tell you, this thing, because of this high flat grind, is very, very slicey. So perhaps this is a slightly different blade than what some people have seen. I know they make one that has a large flat up here, and so there's less distance for this to travel down to this cutting surface. But on this particular model, this particular SMF, it is very slicey. It has a very robust and stabby tip. Well, you know me. I mean, if you're going to get into a gas station fight, the way this thing is designed, it is really oriented towards that. I don't think you want to get into a gas station fight anyway, but if you do and you want to take a near $600 knife, yeah, you could use this. It would certainly do the job. Let's get the overall size. We got the blade. Let's knock the whole rest of it out. You get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, just at 9 inches overall. The grip length, we're going to do it in two ways. We're going to do it from the choil, from the from the handle side of the choil and then forward. So from the back of the blade itself, you get 1, 2, 3, 4 and a little bit, so 4 1/4 inches of handle grip just here. If we take into account this forward choil, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches of handle. That's a lot for a 3 1/8 inch blade, no question. But that's the Strider design. That is what he feels is the best possible layout for a work knife. And, you know, in the time I've had this, while there are knives that have blades that I like more, I'm not going to argue. He clearly has stumbled across something here that works exceptionally well for a lot of people and for good reason. Now, I mentioned it's a very thick chunk of CPM 20CV. Let's go ahead and take a look at how fat that is. I'll zero that out. Are we on millimeters? No, we're on inches. There we go. All right. Back here at the thickest point, we are looking at just shy of 5 millimeters, 4.81 millimeters. That is a thick chunk of CPM 20 CV. I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to get the edge geometry here, but we're going to give it a shot. All right. We go to inches. We are zeroed. I'm getting 0.18. I don't know if you guys can see that or not. 0.16. I mean, this thing is really, really thin behind the edge right down here. It is very, very nice. It does thicken up very quickly because of how fat that is, but man, this is a real slicer, and I was not expecting that. My S&G was also of similar thickness through here, but because of the slightly shorter blade, it was not that thin behind the edge. So this thing is really a cutter. Oh, excuse me. The handle thickness, which matters, of course, is just slightly over a 1/2 inch. And because there is no sculpting at all, it is that dimension all the way down the length of the handle. It is thick in the pocket, particularly up here at the top of the pocket, where this sort of fat tail is up here. The knife itself is 1 3/4 inches this way, which is a lot of real estate in the pocket. I'm not going to lie. Now, I've ordered a deep carry clip. I work in an office, and I work in a school, and having this much knife sticking out, particularly one that is this large, isn't really conducive to the environment that I work in. But MXG and a couple other companies make really nice deep carry clips that are going to shorten that up to about that much knife, and that will be fine. Once this is dropped below the pocket, it's very, very hard to see. And because it is at just about a little over 1/2 inch, but not much, all the way down the body of the knife, in the pocket, at least for my pockets, it basically disappears. Again, accepting that it does take up, you know, a lot of real estate. Because there is no flipper, there is no pocket pecker, nothing to jab the things in your pocket, which is very nice. I really enjoy the construction of this thing. I really do. Let's compare it to some knives, shall we? The first thing I thought of when I got my original Strider, which again was the SNG, was this. This is the ZT. This one is the 0303. I have the original 0300 around here somewhere. These knives share a fair amount of characteristics in some subtle ways. Now, they don't look anything alike, but both of them are a different material across the show side, usually titanium on the lock side. This one, of course, is G10 and titanium. This one does have a hardened steel lock bar, but the original 0300 did not, and they came out at about the same time. They are both running on washers as opposed to bearings to allow for a harder use environment. The reason that is the case is that washers require less lube, and they don't build stuff up inside them. Bearings are awesome. I love bearings. I am super excited about knives running on bearings. But the truth is, if you're out in the mud and the muck and whatever, every one of those bearings has the potential of picking up crap. So knives that are running on washers don't have that same problem, which is why these harder use knives tend to lean into that. Another knife that comes to mind when I look at this thing is very much the XM24 by Hinderer. These knives have very similar overall dimensions, although the XM24 is a little longer, and you do get a lot more cutting surface on the XM24. Even with the choil, you get more blade. But these knives definitely fill a very similar spot. The XM24 is a little thicker through the handle, as you can see. But they are definitely competitors, and they are within spitting distance of the same price, which is crazy expensive. But again, if you had to have one knife, either one of these would suit just fine. I have a budget knife. Well, okay, budget in these terms that I think of quite a bit when I look at this, particularly because of the way this is shaped. And that's this. This is the M390 version of the Benchmade Contigo, and these, again, both fill very similar spots in the pocket. This is about 180 bucks. This is about almost 500. Let's just go with $500. And yet, for most of us, this one is going to do the same job. So if you're looking for a knife that is tough and built for outdoor use and oriented towards harder use with a monster blade with a great edge, you cannot go wrong here. I think when we move up into the Strider area, we're looking at a different approach to knives. When you get a Strider, it's because you want a Strider. It's just that simple. There are competitors all over the place that do a very similar job. But there's something about this design that appeals not just to me, but to a lot of people. I still wrestle with the price. I mean, I wrestle with the price with this thing, for sure. But because they are sort of unique in the market, and although there are knives that do a similar job or even the same job, there are no other Striders. And perhaps that's part of it. So if you're a collector or someone who's going to have one knife in a hard use environment and you want to invest the money, go for it. Seriously, go for it. Let's go ahead and weigh this thing out. I'm curious myself. I don't really know how much they weigh. I love that sound. Let's get out the magic scale. Now remember, this is aluminum on titanium and a big fat chunk of CPM 20CV. But let's go ahead. 6.1 ounces on a 9-inch knife. It's actually not that bad. By way of example, the Hinderer XM24 is 7.8 ounces. And that Benchmade we looked at is just a little lighter at 5.8. And that's because this is G10 on both sides. This has this big fat chunk of titanium and aluminum on it. The ZT0303 is 8.2. So even though these knives are similar in materials, similar thicknesses of blade, although the blade on the Strider is a lot thicker, you do get a lot more knife for a lot less weight with the Strider, and I think that's really cool. So what's the wrap up? These things are stupid expensive. Oh, by the way, the centering on this thing is just dead on, and this has had at least one other owner, likely a couple of them. These knives do tend to change hands, but it's in great shape. It really is. So the wrap up is this. These things are stupid expensive. I'm not going to question that. I'm not going to deny that. There is no way around that fact. But there's something about them. There's something special about that Strider design. And I know people that are crazy Strider passionate, and I'm not. I love this thing, but I don't love it necessarily more than my Hinderer. I don't love it more than my Benchmade. And I certainly don't love it more than my ZTO 303. This is one of my all-time favorite knives, hands down. But I do love it. And I love it in the same way I love these other knives. They are enormous and overbuilt and ridiculous, and also very, very good at what they do. And that, to me, is what sets them apart from, you know, crazy fantasy style knives. These are knives that are ridiculous because they're designed around being ridiculous to be good at what they do, as opposed to just crazy knives with hyper expensive materials that are, well, these knives are expensive because of what they are, not because of what's on them. And I'm okay with that. I think you might be too. If you are looking for a kick-ass, hard-use knife that will serve you until you are done needing it, the Strider SMF is definitely one direction to look in. Thank you so much for your time today. This has been an absolute blast. I'm really happy to have this in the collection. If you have any questions about the XM24, the 0303, or even the Benchmade Contigo, feel free to ask down in the comments. Of course, if you have any questions about the Strider here, feel free to ask those down in the comments as well. If you haven't liked the video yet, please do so. It helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so on your way out. I would love to have you here on a regular basis, and we'll see you next time.